This man isn't a hero, he's dangerous. That was the final accusation. The courtroom fell silent. The old man sat there, handcuffed, without saying a single word. No one knew he was the sniper who once saved an entire unit. No one asked, no one cared. Until a black SUV pulled up outside the courthouse. A four-star general walked in and knelt before the very man the whole town had condemned. Because sometimes justice doesn't speak through arguments. It speaks through silence, the silence of a man who once saved the world. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The sky over Wyatteville, Missouri, hung low that morning. A pale gray stretched across the horizon, thick with the kind of clouds that whispered rain before the first drop ever fell. Inside the old county courthouse, the halls smelled faintly of mildew and coffee brewed too long. The bailiff's footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow and deliberate. At the clerk's bench, Abigail Knox adjusted her headset and opened her notebook. She'd worked in this courthouse for 13 years, typed out hundreds of testimonies, heard every excuse a man could give under oath, but nothing that day felt ordinary. The moment they opened the side door, Abigail looked up, and everything in the room shifted just a little. Two deputies entered first. Between them was an old man, handcuffed. He moved with quiet precision. No struggle, no protest. As if he knew exactly how each step would land. As if this moment wasn't new to him, but something he'd carried in his bones for years. The name on the docket read Raymond Cole, age 66, no prior convictions, charged with misdemeanor threat of violence. But Abigail knew this wasn't just another angry man who lost his temper at a gas station. Something about him was different. He wore a plain gray shirt tucked into faded jeans, both neatly pressed, boots laced tight, polished, not for show out of habit. His face was weathered, etched with deep creases like old maps. But it was his eyes that held her. Not blank, not angry, just still. When the prosecutor rose to introduce the case, a few people in the gallery whispered. One woman nudged the man beside her. "Is that the guy who threatened someone at the Sunoco last month?" The man shrugged. "Probably PTSD. Looks like he's seen war." A juror rolled her eyes. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Raymond Cole just stood there. Didn't blink, didn't twitch, didn't say a word. Abigail tapped her keys slowly, unsure what to write beyond the silence. The prosecutor, a young man with a smirk too big for his suit, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone smooth, practiced. "This case may look simple, but what we have here is a man using his military past to intimidate others. He served once, yes, a long time ago. But this is not heroism. This is danger." He paused for effect. Raymond didn't flinch. From the back row, someone snorted. Another chuckled. The alleged incident. A scuffle at a gas station. A man mid-30s claimed Raymond threatened to end him from 800 yards. That was the phrase they latched onto. Military violence, the report said. No weapon, no assault, just words. But those words, they unsettled people. Abigail had typed up dozens of threat reports before. Most came with yelling, spitting. Not this. Raymond had shown up at every hearing, on time, alone, wearing the same clothes, like a man walking through fog, not a courtroom. Even Judge Beltran, the sternest woman Abigail had ever worked for, hesitated before calling his name. "Mr. Cole," she said now, her voice clipped, "do you have anything you wish to say to the court?" He lifted his gaze, not toward the judge, not toward the jury, but toward the door, like he was waiting on someone. Then he shook his head. Just once. Abigail felt it again. That strange, weighted stillness. The kind that made even the fluorescent lights seem to buzz quieter. From the prosecution table, the alleged victim sat with a soft brace around his neck, eyes shifting nervously. He looked like a man trying to sell a story he no longer believed. The defense attorney, a public defender who couldn't have been older than 25, flipped through his files. Lost. Raymond didn't even glance at him. He sat down slowly when the judge nodded, hands resting gently on his knees. Back straight, shoulders squared, a soldier's posture. Abigail's fingers hovered above her keys. She didn't know why, but she felt something coming. Then it happened. Outside, a black SUV pulled into the courthouse lot, unmarked, no sirens, no commotion. But the moment the doors opened, everything changed. A man stepped out. His uniform was immaculate, crisp lines, silver trim, 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder. He carried no briefcase, spoke to no one, just walked, steady and silent, through the front doors. The security guard at the front desk stood up. No ID was asked, no explanation given. The man said 3 words, "Courtroom 3, please." And the building held its breath. Abigail saw the door swing open, heads turned, phones clicked. Even the prosecutor paused mid-sentence. The judge stood not out of protocol, but out of instinct. The man walked past everyone, past the jury box, past the stunned attorneys. He walked straight to Raymond and stopped. Raymond looked up, and for the first time that day, something in his face changed. Recognition. They didn't shake hands. They didn't speak. They just looked at each other. In the silence that followed, Abigail felt her chest tighten. She didn't know who this man was, but Raymond did. And whatever tied them together, it ran deeper than anyone in that room could see. The judge found her voice. "General, may I ask what brings you here today?" The man turned slowly, faced the room, and spoke, his voice low but unwavering. "I'm here because that man saved my life." The room stilled, dead silent. He continued, "He doesn't know I came. He wouldn't have asked. In fact, knowing him, he probably hoped I wouldn't. But I heard about this trial and I couldn't stay silent." Abigail didn't type, couldn't. She just watched the moment everything shifted. And deep down, she knew. On that watch to him. This wasn't going to be an ordinary day in court. Not anymore. When General Harding, 4 stars glinting under the courthouse lights, said the words, "That man saved my life," everything stopped. Not a gasp, not a murmur, just silence. The kind you don't fill with noise. The kind that demands respect. Abigail Knox could barely breathe. Her hands hovered above the keyboard. And for the first time in her career, she forgot to type. The general didn't ask to approach the bench. He didn't ask for permission to speak. But no one stopped him. He turned slowly toward the judge, then faced the courtroom, and began. 31 years ago, he said, voice firm. I was pinned behind a collapsed wall outside Fallujah. My team had been ambushed. 2 men down. Radios dead. The building was crumbling around us, and the enemy was closing in. He paused. I was a captain then. Green. Panicked. And then, out of nowhere, a sniper opened a path. Abigail leaned forward slightly, breath caught in her chest. 12 targets, 4 minutes, each one precise, silent, surgical. The general's eyes never left Raymond Cole. The final shot, he said, his voice softening, came from 936 yards, a rooftop hatch, crosswind, moving target. He blinked once, slowly. That shot saved my life. Gasps rippled quietly through the room. Raymond didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even shift in his chair. But something in his shoulders relaxed just slightly. The general took one step closer. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that man sitting before you didn't just serve. He didn't just fight. His voice deepened. He protected this country with a level of skill, calm, and sacrifice most of us will never understand. Another pause. And now you've put him in chains. The judge cleared her throat, visibly shaken. General Harding, do you wish to provide sworn testimony? I do, he said, never breaking his gaze. He raised his hand, was sworn in, and then Pete told the rest of the story. How Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Cole served in 4 theaters of war. How his file remained partially classified. How he never once spoke of his record not in public. Not even to fellow veterans. He never chased medals, the general said. He buried his memories, lived alone, quiet, out of sight. Not because he was ashamed, but because that's what warriors like him do. Abigail watched Raymond closely. He stared down at his hands, rough, calloused, still steady after all these years. No tears, no nods, just stillness. But Abigail knew something was breaking loose beneath that silence. The prosecutor tried to object, tried to reframe the case. Your Honor, he argued, none of this changes the fact that Mr. Cole threatened a civilian with implied violence. The general turned toward him, calm, direct. Did you hear the quote that was submitted as evidence? He didn't wait for a response. He allegedly said, I could end you from 800 yards. He held up a single finger. That's not a threat. That's a fact. The room froze. Even the jury stopped shifting in their seats. He didn't pull a weapon. The general continued. He didn't advance. He didn't even stand. He said words that reminded a coward what real consequences look like. Now even Abigail felt her hands tremble. There was something deeply unsettling and deeply true in that moment. Raymond had not spoken because he knew what silence cost. And more importantly, he knew when to break it. The judge asked for a short recess. Everyone stood. Whispers broke loose in the gallery. A few reporters scrambled for the exit to call in updates. Abigail remained seated, stunned. As the courtroom emptied, she glanced at Raymond, still sitting, still silent. But now there was weight around him, like history itself had just taken a seat beside him. She looked around the room and realized something else. Not one person here had truly known who Raymond Cole was until today. Not the defense, not the prosecution, not even the judge. The press had called him unstable, a reclusive veteran, a ghost living in a trailer outside town. They'd run his mugshot alongside stories of gas station scuffles, whispering PTSD like it was a punchline. But no one asked where he'd served, what he'd sacrificed, what he'd carried home. All they saw was the scarred shell of a man who no longer fit their storybook version of a hero. But Abigail saw it now, the quiet, the composure, the stillness mistaken for menace. He wasn't dangerous. He was witnessing. And for the first time, people were beginning to see it. 20 minutes passed. Then the doors opened again. More SUVs, more boots on marble tile. And then another figure stood by Biden, not in uniform, not in black, but clearly military. A woman this time, older, compact frame, silver streak in her hair, pinned back neatly. She walked straight to the defense table, whispered something to the young attorney. The attorney stood. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to enter an amicus statement from the Department of Veteran Affairs. This pertains to Mr. Cole's service classification and post-deployment record. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have clearance for that? The woman stepped forward, voice steady. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Commander Helen Trask, retired. I oversaw Mr. Cole's final psychological discharge review at Fort Reynolds. She handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff. The judge opened it, read, paused, and then, very quietly, she whispered something no one expected. I see. She turned toward Raymond. Mr. Cole, she said gently, this court owes you more than a verdict. It owes you understanding. Raymond looked up, slowly. No smile, but something flickered in his eyes. Abigail couldn't tell what it was. Relief, regret, maybe just the weight of finally being seen. The judge cleared her throat. Let's bring the jury back in. And as the doors opened once more, Abigail realized this wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning, a long overdue moment where a forgotten man stood silently at the center of something far bigger than himself. And this time, the world had no choice but to listen. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the air felt heavier, not tense, not hostile, just full, like something sacred had settled into the walls. And even the light filtering through the windows seemed to dim in reverence. Abigail Knox sat straighter in her seat, hands trembling above the keys. Raymond Cole hadn't moved. General Joseph Harding stood silently beside him, 4 stars catching the overhead lights. He hadn't saluted, hadn't raised his voice, but somehow, just by being here, he'd turned this tired courtroom into something closer to a monument. The judge tapped her gavel once softly. Court is back in session. She looked to the general. General Harding, please continue your testimony. He stepped forward, slow and measured. No theatrics, no courtroom flair, just truth. I was 27, he began, his voice low and even. It was the spring of 1994. Fallujah had turned to hell. A pause. I was part of a reconnaissance unit that had been sent in to assess damage after a compound raid. We weren't expecting resistance. We were wrong. Abigail typed as fast as she could, but even then, she couldn't capture all of it. We were cut off, no radio, no backup. Just four of us holed up behind a crumbling wall, two already wounded, and every sound, every shadow meant a new threat. He swallowed. I remember the heat, the smoke, the blood, and I remember thinking, duh, this is it. A silence fell across the room. Then his voice softened. One shot, then another, then another. The general turned slightly toward the jury. Clean, controlled, precise. A sniper had taken position nearly a kilometer away. We didn't know who, we didn't know where. We just knew the fire stopped. Because someone was clearing a path. Tears welled in his eyes. But he kept going. 12 confirmed targets, each shot within seconds of the last. And the final one, a rooftop insurgent, preparing to fire an RPG into our wall. He looked at the jury, then at the judge. That last shot was the difference between my name on a report and my name on a headstone. He took a breath. That sniper was Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Cole. A gasp broke through the silence. The prosecutor, still seated, looked like he'd been punched. His face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The young man who'd accused Raymond, he shrank into his chair, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The jury simply stared. No one blinked. No one moved. Only Abigail's fingers danced over the keyboard, barely keeping up, but needing to capture every word. Harding stepped forward again, closer to Raymond. He never told me he was the one. Not once. Not in all these years. He turned to the court. That's what gets me. He looked down for a moment, voice cracking just slightly. He saved my life. And instead of standing on a podium, he chose a trailer at the edge of town. Another pause. And now we've put him on trial for silence. The general stepped forward once more, past the rail, past the prosecution table. He stopped in front of Raymond. And then without ceremony, without flourish, he went down to one knee. Not out of tradition, not for show, but in apology and gratitude. A collective breath caught in the room. Not even the judge spoke. No one expected it. No one knew what to do with it. This wasn't politics. Wasn't theater. This was sacred. Raymond stared down at the general, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed. But for the first time all day, his hand moved. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the general's shoulder. Then just as slowly he stood, chains still wrapped around his wrists, but he stood tall, shoulders squared, back straight, a Marine, still. Harding rose, and the two men looked at each other for a long, breathless moment. No words, just a nod, and then a handshake. No applause followed. No cameras flashed. Only stillness. Deep, echoing stillness. Abigail wiped at her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She wasn't alone. One of the jurors, the woman who'd rolled her eyes earlier, was now crying quietly into a tissue. Even the bailiff, usually made of stone, stood ramrod straight, his lips pressed into a line. The judge finally cleared her throat, but it caught once. She set down her gavel and folded her hands. In light of this testimony and the extraordinary nature of the facts presented, her voice faltered, then steadied. I am dismissing all charges against Mr. Raymond Cole, effective immediately. No cheering, no shouting, just reverence. The sound of shackles being unlocked, the soft clink of metal falling away. Raymond rubbed his wrist once, then turned to the jury. He didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't smile. He just nodded once, firm and walked down the center aisle with the same quiet gait that had carried him through every hearing before. Only now he was free, not just from the courtroom, but from the burden of being forgotten. Outside, the sidewalk was lined. Veterans stood at attention, some in old uniforms, others in worn jackets and hats with faded patches. They didn't cheer, they didn't chant. They saluted, one by one. As Raymond passed, he didn't say a word. He didn't have to, because finally someone had spoken for him, and finally someone had listened. The courtroom emptied slowly. No one rushed. No one shoved past the pews or lunged for the door. They moved with something heavier, something gentler. Respect. Outside, the morning light had shifted. The sky, once dim and overcast, now broke gently open, casting soft beams of sun across the courthouse steps. Raymond Cole stood quietly near the entrance. No press followed, no microphones, just people. People who had once whispered when he passed. Now they simply watched. Some stood with hats over their hearts, others with hands folded in front of them, unsure what to do, but knowing they should do something. Abigail Knox remained in the clerk's bench for a while after the judge adjourned. She should have started closing the file, should have cleared the docket for the next case. But she didn't. She just sat there, watching through the tall windows as Raymond stepped out into the light. No chains, no guards, just the slow, steady walk of a man who had never asked to be understood, but had been. Finally, Raymond paused on the top step, and there, waiting for him was a small group of veterans, some in wheelchairs, some walking slowly with canes, some barely standing, but still trying. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. One of them, an old Navy man, by the look of his cap, saluted first, then another, and then another, until the whole line of them stood at attention, as if he were their commanding officer. Abigail felt her throat tighten again. She wiped her cheek, quickly, hoping no one would notice. The man who had walked into the courthouse as a defendant was walking out as something else entirely. Not a hero made by headlines, not the subject of a viral video or a 60-second reel, but a man finally remembered. And in a quiet town like Wyatteville, that mattered more than people realized. The sheriff approached Raymond at the bottom of the steps, took off his hat, extended a hand. Raymond looked at him, and after a pause, took it. The handshake was brief, no words spoken, but the message was clear. Something had shifted. Justice hadn't just been done. It had been seen. Abigail finally closed her notebook, standing slowly. She walked through the now empty courtroom, heels clicking softly against the old wood floors. At the door, she paused just for a second and looked back. Raymond's seat still sat empty, but it felt full somehow, full of everything that had been carried there. Pain, duty, memory, silence. And for the first time in her career, she didn't feel like a clerk recording lines of law. She felt like a witness, a keeper of something real. That evening, long after the courthouse lights dimmed and the stories began to travel from diner to gas station to kitchen table, Abigail sat alone at her own. The news would twist the headlines. Veteran freed after general surprise testimony. Decorated sniper wrongfully accused. But none of those would capture it. Not really. Because what happened inside that courtroom wasn't just about Raymond Cole. It was about all of them, all the ones who served quietly, who came home to trailers on the edge of town, who never told their stories because no one ever asked. It was about every man and woman who carried the weight of war inside their ribs and learned to smile anyway. Raymond never wanted the spotlight, never asked to be defended. But this time, someone stood up for him. And maybe that, Abigail thought, is the most powerful kind of justice there is. Not the kind that comes with applause or legal drama or viral fame, but the kind that arrives like a steady hand on your shoulder when the world finally says, "We see you." Because some men never raise their voices. Some never speak about what they've done. And yet, somehow, their silence echoes louder than any anthem. Abigail stood, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and looked out her kitchen window toward the courthouse steps across the square. They looked the same, but they weren't. Not anymore. She smiled softly to herself. the words forming in her chest before she even realized she was thinking them. The man never asked to be protected. But this time, someone did it for him. And maybe, just maybe, that's what justice really looks like. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.